What's not to love about vintage watches on the surface? You're getting a watch from a great brand, usually at a significant discount over what the watch would retail for new. Well, here's my experience with vintage watches. So first things first, what is a vintage watch? Definitions tend to vary, but most of them say a vintage watch should be about 25 to 30 years old. I have never purchased a vintage watch myself. All the watches I have that are in that age or older have either been gifted to me or were my late father's watches that I have since acquired. Starting with the Tudor Day-to-Day. That was a watch my father gave me when I was a young kid. Second is his Omega DeVille quartz. This was his dress watch, and the third is the Seiko 5. This was a watch I found in his drawer after his passing, and based on the scars in the watch, I assumed this was his daily wear. Since then, I've changed out the Seiko strap with the sailcloth strap. Now, let's get into my experience with vintage watches. Starting out with the Tudor Day-to-Day. This watch ran great, but about 15 years ago, the date wheel slipped off. I had to send it back to have it repaired, and it came back fine. And since then, it's worked without a single issue. I do send it in every 5 years to have it serviced. The next watch is the Omega DeVille. This watch stopped working a couple of years ago before I sent it in for its first service in about 2013 in Japan. The watch took about 7 or 8 months to come back from the factory in Switzerland, and it worked well once again until after my father's passing I got the watch again and it stopped working. I then had to send it back via the Omega store in the United States back to Switzerland. This time it took about 7 months, but the bill was an eye-watering $1,495, almost $1,500, to basically service the watch, which admittedly wasn't working, and perhaps to polish the dial. The third watch I want to talk about right now was the Seiko 5. This watch prompted this video. I happened to drop this watch from my kitchen counter onto the floor yesterday, no more than probably 2.5 to perhaps even 3 feet. My Casio Duro survived without a single scratch. However, the Seiko 5, as you can see, the hour marker is no longer at the 10 o'clock position. It's lodged somewhere between the 11 and 12 o'clock position, which shows you one thing. These watches tend to be more fragile than their newer counterparts. In the case of the Seiko, it probably doesn't even make sense to send it out to a watch maker to have that baton fixed. It really doesn't, given the price point of the watch. My point is this: when getting into vintage watches, make sure you not only have the money to buy the watch, but also the money for the inevitable servicing of the watch, which is more than just the standard 2, 3, 4, 5 year servicing you'll have to do with a new watch. Things tend to be not as solid with a vintage watch than they do with a new watch. And that's primarily because these watches are worn. And the more you wear something on the wrist, the more chances there are that things may break. Do I love these watches? Absolutely. Is there a sentimentality to them? Yes, there is. Will these watches, especially the Tudor and the Omega, be handed down to my next generation? Absolutely they will. Would I buy a new vintage watch? Absolutely not. To me, one of the pleasures of owning a watch is wearing it on your wrist. Ignoring even the cost for a second, the Omega watch, before I sent it back to the factory store in the United States, I tried to send it to an independent watchmaker who sat on the watch for 5 months, not knowing really what to do. And that's what you get with them. You're going to have to also understand that to fix these watches, it's more than a monetary cost. It's also a time cost in there. And that's why I lean more towards the newer watches. Now, let me be clear. When my next generation inherits my watches, they're probably going to experience the same things I do, but it'll be for sentimental reasons, the good as well as the servicing costs and the time. Hopefully, if they're into watches by then, they can start their new collection and, much like me, have the legacy of our family told through vintage watches. And that's what it means to me, a legacy of a family. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to see the rest of my watch collection, do subscribe to the channel, as I have a lot of videos about the watches that I own in the channel. Thank you so much for watching.